let's talk about another story. This is about your think tank, I think, actually, saying that migrants boost the economy is overestimated. How have you come to that conclusion?
So the Office for Budget Responsibility has very irresponsibly forecast the sort of economics for the next 5 or so years and have assumed that migrants, particularly skilled worker migrants, have the same earning, consumption, residential and employment profile to resident skilled workers. Now, that's not the case according to the Office for National Statistics, and as such, the Office for Budget Responsibility has overestimated the earnings of skilled worker migrants by about £20 billion, which means that their tax contributions have been overestimated by about £6 billion. And this is not inconsequential because the Office for Budget Responsibility has a say over the Treasury, over tax policy, over spending policy.
So they're the people who are meant to mark the Treasury's homework, essentially.
That's
and
right.
They've got their sums wrong, you're saying, in simple terms.
Yes. Yeah, well, the Office for Budget Responsibility is one of these organisations set up in 2010 by George Osborne. So it's very much how would you say? It's something that's come out of the kind of Cameronite, which is Blairite in blue clothing, way of governing. It's very managerial. It's called an independent watchdog, but of course it's not independent. It's part of the government.
Many migrant groups would say that this is their mistake, it's the OBR's mistake, and that what your think tank is doing is just blaming the migrants.
I don't think we're blaming the migrants. I think we're pointing the finger at the fact that the government, for decades at this point, has lied continuously to the British people about the so-called benefits of mass, uncontrolled, open-border migration.
Well, it's interesting, even when you talk to Labour politicians, others as well, they all say that migration to this country, Scarlett, is too high, 745,000 people net migration, legal migration in the last year. Not talking about illegal migration, talking about legal migration. What do you make of this?
Well, I mean, one of the reasons that migration is so high is because we don't skill British workers, and that was one of the problems with the EU. Can I say that I think Brexit was a terrible mistake? But the reason so many people came over and were so welcomed is because we were taking the skills from other places and we weren't upskilling. I mean, you look at the health service. You go into any NHS hospital, it is full of people from other countries, and they were trained there, and then we poach them and we bring them here. So there is a problem about that Britain has not dealt with about upskilling its workers, about training enough doctors, training enough nurses, and that's why we go abroad. But I'm with you. I mean, I sort of think this whole thing is about blaming it on the migrants instead of saying, actually, thank you for coming in and doing these incredibly difficult jobs. I mean, anybody who's been through the NHS is so grateful.
I certainly don't blame migrants who want to come here for a better life, and I can see the incentives of living in Britain. It's a great country, and there are many migrants who make a huge and very important contribution to our country. The problem, I suppose, is, well, one of the problems, as Scarlett has identified, Charlie, is if you're, let's say, for example, you are a small business, 99% of the economy is small, medium businesses, and you're saying, right, well, we've got someone who's going to work hard, who's come to this country, who's got off their backside and has come to the UK and wants to work hard, or we have local workers who don't want the job or say they want extra training or are perhaps not as reliable, some would argue, especially in some cases. I'm not talking about everybody, obviously. I'm talking about the fact that we're talking about this week. We're talking about the fact that lots of people are off work for long periods of time. We're talking about a lot of people who are saying they have mental health issues, for example, which I'm sure many of them do. But there are lots of economically inactive people in this country, over 9 million actually. If you're a UK employer, who are you going to choose?
I mean, it's a great point, and Scarlett makes a very good point, which is that we don't train our own workers and we do poach labour from other countries. Now, I want to make it very clear that my position and the position of my organisation is that we are blaming the government here. Yeah. Because all of these things are downstream from government policy. We've had mass immigration
and
of this
successive
sort.
governments as well.
That's right.
It's not just the Conservatives, because we do have a skills crisis in this country.
Yes. So the mass immigration that we are talking about, this kind of predominantly low-skilled bringing in of hundreds of thousands of foreign people from anywhere, that began almost 30 years ago at this point, and we've had it for that long, and that's purely a decision made by the governing class, right? It's not something it doesn't just happen, because when mass migration is talked about in the media, a lot of the time it's talked about in terms of, well, it's just something that happens, it's just something that it's like the weather, we have no control over it, it's just something that we can forecast and predict and all this sort of thing.
Well, they can,
it's a
and
specific
they now,
government
post-Brexit, which Scarlett says is a disaster, they can nonetheless now control migration a lot more than they could have previously. They're just choosing not to because there are skills gaps.
Well, let's be clear. Brexit was a referendum on migration. Let's be very clear about this right now. And has Brexit succeeded in that? Absolutely not. Brexit has been a catastrophic failure. It was contained and diffused by the Conservative Party because that's something they do very, very well. I think we're actually, in many ways, seeing that same process happening with Reform UK right now. Reform UK, the supposed dissident, new populist party coming in to replace the Conservatives when they're just a slightly lighter shade of blue for the Conservative Party.
Interesting. Scarlett, what do you think of that?
I mean, what to begin with Reform UK, which is going to destroy the Conservative Party, one has to say.
It's interesting, actually, if you look at the statistics and some of the polling that's out. We're going to talk about this a little bit later. We've got they're around 17% of the vote. And actually, in some red wall seats, you have men versus women. Men are more likely to vote Reform now than to vote for the Conservatives. They're overtaking the Conservatives in some of those seats.
Yeah, I mean, when we get onto it, but I'm going to say that is that what the Conservatives, the problem with the Conservatives is people have given up on them, right? I mean, the Rishi Sunak's Conservatives are losers, and it's all over, and so people are working out where to go, and it's not going to be there. But going back, we have never had, I mean, there is a myth about uncontrolled migration, right? I mean, I know from working with a lot of people how difficult it was in the 90s, under Blair, how difficult it was bringing skilled people in. It's always been difficult, right?
But there was freedom of movement within the EU.
There was freedom of movement within the EU. Absolutely, and it worked both ways. I mean, lots and lots of British people went and worked abroad for a bit.
Not nearly as many as came here, though.
No, and one of the reasons was that we had a good pound, and the other big thing, of course, is we speak English. It's most people's second language, and to our shame, they speak it really, really well. I mean, it is incredible. I mean, I was talking to a Swiss guy yesterday because I've just come back from Switzerland, and who speaks English, French, Italian, and German, and I said, our problem is we don't take languages properly. But actually, so you have these people who they came over, lots and lots of Poles, where they could earn very little in their own country, and they earn more here. And the thing is, what we have to say is, it worked. I mean, it did work. But
it's put lots of pressure. I'm not blaming those people specifically. If you're someone who wants... I mean, I could argue I'm an economic migrant. This job doesn't exist, really, in Northern Ireland. I moved from one part of the UK to another. Am I an economic migrant? Probably. So I'm not down on economic migrants, and I'm very happy to have them as part of the NHS, for example, and other parts of the economy. You can't really blame them for wanting it. You can't blame anybody for wanting a better life, Charlie, can you? But as you say, there are all these other policies around here that have said that a lot of people in the UK aren't, I use the word advisedly, prioritised, essentially, not for education, skills, training, jobs, etc. Some of it is their own fault. Some people are just lazy, but there are a lot of people. I mean, we have 1 million job vacancies in this country, yet we have 9 million people who are economically inactive. Not every single job is going to match up, but you would hope it would.
Yeah, I mean, even now in 2024, when our country is in one of the bleakest and most bleak and depressing states it's ever been in, I don't blame people for wanting to come here, because this is a great country. It's an amazing country. But with that being said, if we're going to talk about myths, I think that it's a myth that this country ever needed mass migration. It's true that we don't train enough of our own skilled workers. But in case you forgot, we had a globe-spanning empire, and we didn't need migration to achieve that. Britain is great because we are a nation of people who have incredibly strong values when it comes to things like work ethic, when it comes to things like propriety and discipline, and that's, I think that's being lost. And in many ways, that's being lost because our culture's being diluted, because we are being treated as just a global colony, just an economic platform that anybody from anywhere can come to and exploit.
Scarlett, you're shaking your head.
Yeah, look. Everybody who comes over here comes over for a job, right? That's what we...
Well, not all of them. I mean, there are members of families, for example, that come for all
there are members of families, but
students,
actually... Yeah, and students, it's great. I mean, it's soft power. The students who come over here, study here, and then normally go back, it's really, really important. I mean, I've got, living in my house, a young woman from Kazakhstan who's on a British Council scholarship, right? She will go back to tell everybody how brilliant Britain is. I mean, I mean, let alone the fact that the universities could not survive without foreign students. You talk to anybody.
But they're in that position. I mean, that's a whole other argument about top-up fees and all the rest of it. But
they're in that position because there is no money. But most people who come here for jobs. And it's great that they're coming here for jobs.
Can I just say, I think it would be excellent if some of the universities went down. I think half of the universities in this country could do with being shut down because they serve no purpose.